Today, we're really digging into a major piece of legislation. It's the new One Big Beautiful Bill Act just passed by the House. And well, if you're involved with higher education at all, you'll want to listen closely. We're already hearing concerns from university leaders, worries that this could actually make college less accessible and maybe less affordable too. So our job today is to try and unpack what this bill really means for loans, for access, for the whole future of higher ed, looking at the goals and the potential problems.
Yeah, and it's quite a contrast, isn't it? You had President Trump calling it the biggest bill of its kind ever signed, saying it would make the country a rocket ship. Big claims.
Huge claims, but then you hear these warnings.
Exactly. Like from Lynn Pasquarelli, she heads the American Association of Colleges and Universities. She basically told the New York Times she's worried schools could become less economically and racially diverse, which is, a pretty serious potential outcome. It really changes who gets the opportunity.
Right. So if those are the worries, what's the argument for the bill? From the Republican side, what's the thinking? Is it this idea that higher ed needs policing?
That's essentially it. The line is about imposing accountability on a sector that has failed to police itself. And their strategy seems to have two main parts. First, capping student borrowing. They're particularly focused on reining in what they call ballooning graduate student debt.
Okay, capping grad debt. What's the second part?
The second part is taxing university endowments. Those huge funds universities have. A lot of the earnings from those endowments actually go directly to financial aid and scholarships. So taxing them, well, it seems a bit counterintuitive if affordability is a goal.
Yeah. And the financial numbers here are pretty big, right? The CBO.
Oh, yeah. The Congressional Budget Office thinks just the student loan changes could save the government something like $300 billion.
Over a decade.
$300 billion. Wow. But I guess the question is, save it at whose expense? That's the core of the debate, really. A lot of that saving comes from these new limits on federal loans for grad students. The new caps are set at $100,000 for a master's degree and $200,000 for doctoral, medical, or similar professional degrees. The Trump administration's take was, by reducing borrowing availability, we break the cycle of debt, making higher education more accessible.
More accessible by limiting loans. How does that logic track for critics?
Well, critics say it doesn't. They argue it might just stop some students from going at all or, push them into the private loan market. And that's a big difference because private loans don't have things like public service loan forgiveness. That's huge for people going into, say, teaching or public health. John Fansmith from the American Council on Education put it pretty starkly. He warned medical school may be impossible for these students.
At a time when we need more doctors.
Exactly. He pointed out that medical grads often owe way more than that $200,000 cap already, like over $240,000 sometimes. And on top of those caps, the bill also phases out the federal grad PLUS loan program completely. That's been a really important tool for grad students.
So it's not just the loan amounts, but also the types of loans available. And there's something else too, right, about tying aid eligibility to future income.
Yes, that's another key piece.
Yeah.
Degree programs, undergraduate and graduate, could lose eligibility for federal student aid if their graduates don't meet certain income levels down the line.
So if you're looking at a career path that's maybe more about public service than high salaries, that could be a problem.
It absolutely could impact program viability for fields that aren't traditionally high earning right out of the gate. Now, switching gears slightly, there's the Pell Grant aspect, an earlier, more controversial idea about letting Pell Grants go to unaccredited programs. That got shot down.
Okay.
But there was bipartisan agreement on something else, letting students use Pell Grants for short-term work training programs, things like cloud computing courses or getting certified to drive a forklift. Community colleges especially seem to really like this idea.
Makes sense. More pathways into specific jobs for maybe non-traditional students.
Right, making that kind of workforce training a bit more accessible.
And we should probably briefly mention this bill isn't happening in a vacuum. There are also big cuts to Medicaid involved overall. And experts are pointing out that new work requirements tied to Medicaid could make things even tougher for low-income students trying to balance school, work, maybe family.
It all ties together. What's really fascinating here is seeing this attempt to balance or claim to balance fiscal concerns with access. It really forces us to ask, who is higher education for, and how should we as a society fund it?
So the big question for you listening right now, what does all this mean for your future? Whether you're planning for college or maybe advising someone who is, how might these changes really reshape opportunities? Will these measures ultimately make higher education more accessible, like proponents claim? Or could they, maybe unintentionally, just put up new roadblocks? Something to think about.